morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. For today's lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installment into our series on Mr. Algernon Sidney's Discourses Concerning Government. We're going on to Chapter 1, Section 19, so if you haven't gone back and watched Sections 1 through 18, I highly encourage you to do so, because Algernon Sidney, his works in general, greatly, significantly influenced the thinking of the founding generation. So if you want to go about understanding not just what the U.S. Constitution says, but the rudimentary principles that founded the ideals which led to the construction of the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the Articles of the Confederation, consulting Mr. Sidney's work is going to greatly help you, greatly provide you a benefit to that endeavor. So let's go ahead and jump on over to Mr. Sidney's work. Now, Section 19, quite the lengthy section. I encourage all of you to go read it. The parts that I kind of skipped over, didn't highlight, were examples. The examples are very helpful in understanding the argument he's making here, which is why, of course, I always encourage you go read this section for yourself in its entirety. The reason I'm extracting the most important tidbits, or the most important I find to be, is so that way this lecture hopefully doesn't end up being an hour long and still provides you the very important, very critical information in a concise, easily digestible format. So Section 19, this one's not so aptly titled. It is a fair title, but there are, in my opinion, more important arguments that he makes in this section than what he provides in the summary of this section. For the summary, he says, "Kings cannot confer the right of father upon princes, nor princes upon kings." He starts off, "Lest what has been said before by our author," he's talking about Robert Filmer. He's not talking about himself in the third person. He's talking about Robert Filmer, who wrote Patriarcha. "Before by our author should not be sufficient to accomplish his design of bringing confusion upon mankind, and some may yet lie still for want of knowing at whose command he should cut his brother's throat, if he has not power or courage to set up a title for himself. He has a new project that would certainly do his work if it were received." So he's continuing on the idea that we were discussing, or that he was discussing in Section 18, and I think in Sections 16 and 17 as well, where he's making this argument that no, if you become king, if you get into power through crimes, through aggravation and aggression, that is not a just, legitimate inheritance of power. Robert Filmer believes so. Algernon Sidney says that's contrary to natural law. Further, he says, "Not content with the absurdities and untruths already uttered in giving the incommunicable right of fathers." Incommunicable. No one can pass this right down to anybody else. "Not only to those who, as is manifestly testified by sacred and profane histories, did usurp a power over their fathers, or such as owed no manner of obedience to them." So no matter how many times we've seen it, these tragedies in history where usurpation did occur, doesn't justify it. "And justifying those usurpations, which are most odious to God and all good men, he now fancies a kingdom so gotten may a sheet for want of an heir, whereas there is no need of seeking any, if usurpation can confer a right, and that he who gets the power into his hands ought to be reputed the right heir of the first progenitor. For such a one will be seldom wanting, if violence and fraud be justified by the command of God, and nations stand obliged to render obedience, till a stronger or more successful villain throws him from the throne he had invaded." So implicitly and somewhat directly, he's saying, what would be the point of having inherited power if all that really matters is who's the biggest bully? Why does it matter that we have kings and princes if there's someone bigger who comes along and just cuts the king or the prince's throat? There's no point. Yet Filmer is trying to maintain both, which is what he shows in this paragraph here. I believe this is a quote from Filmer. Further, he says, so this is back to Sidney. We're not talking about what Filmer said. This is what Sidney says. "I may justly ask how any one or more families come to be esteemed more antient than others, if all are descended from one common father, as the scriptures testify. So what he was saying here, Filmer, in this quote, is because of certain qualities, wealth, wisdom, fame, luck, all of these are supposedly what bring about a prime head that can then be conferred the authority or the power of the title father. So Sidney says in rebut, but if we all come from the same person, if we all come from a singular father, how is it that these different qualities could then justify one individual gaining authority over everybody else? It doesn't follow naturally. Or to what purpose it were to inquire what families were the most ancient, if there were any such, when the youngest and most mean by usurpation gets an absolute right of dominion over the eldest, though his own progenitors, as Nimrod did. But I may certainly conclude that whatever the right be that belongs to those antient families, it is inherent in them and cannot be conferred on any other by any human power. So Sidney's saying, okay, for spits and giggles, let's assume that's true. Whoever is the oldest family, whoever's been around the longest, even though we all supposedly come from the same father, according to the scriptures, even if that were true, ultimately, if we try to uphold Filmer's argument, it still wouldn't matter, because it would just be whoever has the biggest sword, whoever has the most power, whoever is the biggest bully is going to be the one getting dominion in the end. It is inherent in them and cannot be conferred on any other by any human power, for it proceeds from nature alone. The duty I owe to my father does not arise from an usurped or delegated power, but from my birth derived from him. And 'tis as impossible for any man to usurp or receive by the grant of another the right of a father over me, as for him to become or protected to be made my father by another who did not beget me. The only person who has the right to be called father, and thus be entitled to the obedience which comes with the title of father, is the individual who begets you, who birthed you, who caused your existence to come about. Further, he says, if this be capable of an aggravation. So he's talking about, Filmer had brought up, or kind of alluded to, what about adoption? This is how princes and kings come about getting their title father over the nation, over the people in their nation. What about adoption? Here's what Sidney has to say in reply. If this be capable of an aggravation, I think none can be greater than not to leave it to my own discretion, who having no father, may resolve to pay the duty I owe to my father to one who may have shown kindness to me. So because it's something my original father would have wanted me to do, I'm going to show obedience to this man showing me kindness. But for another to impose a father upon me, or a people composed of fathers, or such as have fathers, whereby they should be deprived of that natural honor and right, which he makes the foundation of his discourse, is the utmost of all absurdities. So because I have a duty to my original father, to be good to this man, to be loyal to this man who is now showing me kindness, in the absence of my father, whether that be from abandonment, whether that be from dying in war, whether that be from defending the family, because I have that duty to my original father to show kindness to this adoptive father, I'm going to show obedience to this adoptive father. But that does not then necessitate that when a father, such as a king or a prince, is imposed upon me, without any sort of obligation provided or implied by my original father, then I have no obligation, I have no allegiance, I have no reason, according to natural law, to show that obedience to that supposed imposed father figure. If any prince, therefore, have ever undertaken to appoint fathers of his people, he cannot be accounted a man of profound wisdom, but a fool or a madman, and his acts can be of no value. So this is alluding back to what Filmer is trying to say are the most important or significant qualities of what brings about who can and who can't become father. Things like wealth, wisdom, fortune, luck, so on, so forth. Sidney is saying, if a prince believes that he can impose a father figure on someone, then he is not wise. Which means, according to Filmer's own standards, his prince status, his monarchical rule and reign is illegitimate. Further, Sidney says to choose or institute a father is nonsense in the very term. But if any were to be chosen to perform the office of fathers to such as have none, and are not of age to provide for themselves, none could be capable of being elected, but such as in kindness to the person they were to take under their care, did most resemble his true father, and had the virtues and abilities required rightly to provide for his good. So again, he's reiterating, if we're going to suppose that someone else can have the title of father, rather than only the man who begot you, then that supposed father figure, this new father figure, would have to share the qualities and the traits of the father who actually did beget you. Why? Because your loyalty belongs to that man, not this new imposed father figure, not the king, not the prince. It belongs to the father who begot you. He says, no wise or good man ever thought otherwise of those who through the folly of princes have been advanced to the highest places in several countries. I confess that a man in his infancy may have been exposed like Moses, Cyrus, Oedipus, Romulus. He may have been taken in war, or by the charity of some good person, saved from the teeth of wild beasts, or from the sword by which his parents fell, and may have been educated with that care which fathers usually have of their children. So exactly what we were just talking about. If it comes about, God forbid, that your father is taken by war, beasts, sword, charity, so on, if that happens to you, here are the next steps. And may have been educated with that care which fathers usually have of their children. 'Tis reasonable that such a one in the whole course of his life should pay that veneration and obedience to him. Why? Because he served you. Even if you didn't agree to it, even if you didn't consent to it, even if you didn't know what was going on in your infancy, he still served you. He allocated time, resources, sometimes going to the extent of giving his own life for you. So in order to show veneration, honor, and respect to that sacrifice, to that service, you give to him veneration and obedience, who gave him, as it were, a second birth, which was due to his natural father. And this, though improperly, may be called an adoption. So exactly what we were talking about earlier. Because your original father, the man who begot you, has, God forbid, fallen in the natural course of life, and now comes this new father figure, this new man, that shows and demonstrates the same qualities, traits, goals, ambitions, character as the father who begot you, you can show to him in return for his kindness. You can show to him veneration and obedience. Again, he's not being imposed upon you. You both are making an elected decision. But to think that any man can assume it to himself, or confer it upon another, and thereby arrogate to himself the service and obedience which, by the most tender and sacred laws of nature, father and son, the 10 sacred laws of nature we owe to those from whom we receive birth and education, is the most preposterous folly that hitherto has ever entered into the heart of man. Scroll down further, as you can see, he gives a ton of examples, and the examples help greatly in understanding exactly the arguments, or in helping bring to life the arguments that he's making here. Again, the only reason I didn't highlight them is because this lecture would be an hour, hour and a half. But please, go read this entire section for yourselves on your own time. Further, he says, but 'tis no matter what the prophets, the apostles, or the wisest of men say of riches and the ways of gaining them. This is going to be so important. Get your highlighters ready. For our author tells us that men of the greatest fortunes, without examining how they came to them, or what use they make of them, deserve to be made fathers of provinces. So Sidney is saying, despite what men who are far wiser than any of us, despite what their ideas were, despite what the scriptures say, Robert Filmer says actually none of that matters. None of that past wisdom, none of those truths matter. The only thing that matters among wisdom is fortune. And that whoever has the greatest fortune is the one most deserving to be this new father. Even without examining how they came about attaining that fortune. So whoever's just the richest, the wealthiest, that man is who deserves to become this new father over the province. Don't ask how he attained that fortune. Just obey it. Believe it to be true. Sidney says, but this is not his only quarrel with all that is just and good. His whole book, Patriarcha, goes directly against the letter and spirit of the Scripture. The work of all those whom God in several ages has raised up to announce his word was to abate the lusts and passions that arise in the hearts of men. The Scripture, truths of history, say directly contrary to what Filmer says. That in fact, it isn't about riches, it isn't about wealth, it isn't about fortune, rather the exact opposite. To show the vanity of worldly enjoyments with the dangers that accompany riches and honors, and to raise our hearts to the love of those treasures that perish not, eternal, ethereal, not tangibles, not materialist goods, things that do not perish. If they deserve credit, whosoever would become supreme Lord and Father of his country, absolute, sacred, and inviolable, is only to kill him that is in the head of the government. Usurpation confers an equal right with election or inheritance. We are to look upon the power, not the ways by which it is obtained. Possession only is to be regarded, and men must venerate the present power as set up by God, though gained by violence, treachery, or poison. Children must not impose laws upon, nor examine the actions of their fathers. Further down, but since our author is pleased to teach us these strange things, I wish he would also have told us how many men in every nation ought to be looked upon as adopted fathers. Okay, Filmer, even though you go against all of history, even though you go against all of Scripture and wisdom and truth, provide us some examples of your standard bringing about and generating good kings. Sidney asks what proportion of riches, ability, or merit is naturally or divinely required to make them capable of this sublime character. Whether the right of this chimerical father does not destroy that of the natural, or whether both continue in force and men thereby stand obliged, in despite of what Christ said, to serve two masters. For if the right of my artificial father arise from any act of the king in favor of his riches, abilities, or merit, I ought to know whether he is to excel in all or any one of these points. Does he have to be wise and wealthy? Just wise and not wealthy? Just wealthy and not wise? And if both, or if one or the other, how so? To what degree? How far, I should have just kept reading. How far and which of them gives the preference? Since 'tis impossible for me to determine whether my father, who may be wise though not rich, is thereby divested of his right, and it comes to be transferred to another, who may be rich though not wise, nor of any personal merit at all, till that point be decided, or so much as to guess when I am emancipated from the duty I owe to him, by whom I was begotten and educated, unless I know whether he be fallen from his right through want of merit, wisdom, or estate. And that can never be, till it be determined that he hath forfeited his right by being defective in all, or any of the three, and what proportion of merit, wisdom, or estate is required in him for the enjoyment of his right, or in another that would acquire it. For no man can succeed to the right of another unless the first possessor be rightly deprived of it. Why? Because as Christ said, you can't serve two masters. So when you get this new father in a king or a prince, the father who begot you loses that right. You can't have two fathers. And it cannot belong to both of them, because common sense universally teaches that two distinct persons cannot, at the same time and in the same degree, have an equal right to the same individual thing. The character of a father is indelible and incommunicable. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be surrendered. He concludes with this, and this is such a core principle to understand. Well, I'll say it this way. This is why it's so incredibly important to remember that your rights as a man, with a capital N, not as in male versus female, but as man, mankind, your rights do not come from the grants of government, do not come from the propension of governments, nations, countries, or states, not even kings and monarchs. They come from God. Thus, God, being the only one to give rights, can also be the only one to take rights. Perfectly stated in a very succinct sentence by Mr. Sidney here. They who have nothing can give nothing. If a king does not give you rights, he cannot take your rights. If a government does not give you rights, it cannot take your rights. Can they try to usurp them? Can they try to, in metaphorically speaking, cut your throat? And by the bully pulpit, try to subvert them? Absolutely. But can they take them? Can they earn them? Can they steal them from you? No. Not according to natural law, not according to the scripture, not according to the most pivotal people who shaped and influenced how the founding generation thought whenever they were going about drafting the U.S. Declaration of Independence, then to the Articles of the Confederation, then to the U.S. Constitution, and definitely in their individual state constitutions. They who have nothing can give nothing. That which gives cannot take that which it did not give. Such an incredibly important foundational principle to the idea of a republican government, to the idea of a free government. Most importantly, to the idea of a free citizenry. I kind of wish he would have put this at the top for the summary, but the summary also fits well for the section. I won't go on any further a monologue. If you have any questions about what was said there by Mr. Sidney in section 19, if you have questions about what was said in the preceding sections, or maybe you have a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information such as this to defend against any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.